Hey friends, it's Loree with the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com. Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to take you along with me this week as I make meals for my family of 7 exclusively from my Homestead Pantry. So if you're new here, you may not know we are in the middle of a pantry challenge. So we're going 90 days eating nothing but the food we have stored here in our pantry. And so I have no idea what I'm going to make this week. I'm just going to take you along in real time, show you what we're making for dinner every night. We typically have leftovers for lunch the following day. And so tonight we're going to have steak. We actually haven't had beef in quite a while. Now we raise our own beef, but we didn't have any in the freezer for a while, so we've been eating canned venison right here, canned chicken, and some frozen venison as well. And so we're really excited to have the steaks that we raised here on our own homestead. We're going to have those tonight for supper. My husband's going to be cooking those up. I'm going to grab some potatoes and onions here out of the pantry. I'm going to fry those up, and we're just going to have a simple down-home meal that's going to be absolutely delicious. And I'll take you along through the rest of the week, show you what we make as well. Hopefully that will give you some inspiration on how you might be able to cook from a pantry like this, give you some ideas on things you might want to start storing in a pantry. So thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoy the video. Potatoes are potatoes that we grew in our garden last year, and we store them here in our pantry, and they keep fairly well, at least until springtime. So I'm always trying to use as many potatoes and onions during the winter as possible. We grew all of our own onions as well, and they also keep fairly well. So I'll just start by giving them a quick scrub. I do not wash my potatoes before I put them in my pantry, just because they store better. So there's always some dirt to scrub off and trim off. And then I'm just gonna give them all a rough chop and throw them into my big cast iron frying pan with some beef tallow. And I'll put a link here for the video where we render our own beef tallow. We don't buy hardly any oil for use in cooking or even soap making anymore. And the tallow has just saved us so much money, and it's so much less expensive and so much healthier. It's always a blessing when you can sit down to a meal with your family and realize that nothing but your hands have touched the food on the table. It's something we've worked hard for a long time to get to, and I want you to know that one step at a time you can get there as well. It's a very satisfying feeling. Also adding in some peppers. These are frozen peppers from our garden. Last summer I just sliced them and then keep them in my freezer. They work great for fajitas. We put them in eggs, obviously fried potatoes, lots of soup, lots of different things. My husband's doing a great job of grilling the steaks. We haven't had any to grill in a while, and of course it's been winter, so it's kind of fun to see what these steaks are like and grill them up. We're anxious to see how they taste. And this is how the potatoes turn out. If you cut your potatoes small, it really doesn't take that long to make fried potatoes and onions. It's a great, quick, and easy side dish. The steak turned out amazing, ended up being very tender. You could basically cut it with a fork if you wanted to. Absolutely delicious meal. Just grabbing a jar of this canned vegetable soup. It's our absolute favorite fast food in the wintertime. It's really snowy and cold today. So I'm just going to brown some hamburger, toss this in, make a little bit of garlic bread, and that's going to be lunch. Super easy lunch on a school day when we don't have much for leftovers. Next thing I decided to make was a beef pot pie with a sourdough pie crust. And all of these recipes are available on the blog wagonwheelhomestead.com. So starting out by making a sourdough pie crust, actually a couple of them. Then I'm just frying up onions and garlic, and I'm actually throwing in some of those leftover fried potatoes from earlier in the week. You can put in fresh potatoes if you'd like, but a beef pot pie or a chicken pot pie is a great way to use up leftovers in your refrigerator. So I'm just going to thicken it with a little bit of flour, and I'm adding in some salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder. Again, the full recipe is on the blog Wagon Wheel Homestead. And I'm also using canned venison for the meat in this. Now you can use brown hamburger. You would obviously brown it up with the onions. I'm also using a jar of plain canned carrots just because I was in a hurry this particular day and I needed something quick. So you can use all fresh veggies or leftover veggies or canned veggies. It doesn't really matter. I'm also adding in some of our home canned beef broth, and I'll put a link here for how you can make that as well. A few peas from our garden last summer, and you want to add those in towards the end so they don't get overcooked. Just giving it a quick toss, letting it cook for just a few minutes. And by the way, I did preheat my oven to 350 degrees, so it would be ready when this is ready to bake. And I like to make my filling in a cast iron skillet because then I'll know kind of how much I need to make. And then I also bake the pot pie in a cast iron skillet of a similar size. You can do it, however you wish. If you don't have a cast iron skillet, just use a 9x13 pan or whatever you have. I'm just rolling out the pie crust. Now, I actually mixed up the pie crust for this quite a while before I made this pot pie. So that's a hack that I use in my kitchen all the time, especially with sourdough, is I mix the dough part up ahead of time and let it sit in the refrigerator. And then I have it for a really fast meal when, if I have a busy evening. So again, just pouring the filling in, and I knew that I had just about the right amount. I'm saving a little bit back for my daughter who is gluten-free, and I will just put hers in a pan and bake it separate. And then I'm just gonna add this pie crust on top. I really like to have pie crust in my fridge because then you could make an apple pie in like less than 5 minutes with my canned apples. You can make a beef pot pie. You can make like Pop-Tarts. You can do a lot with pie crust if you just have it mixed up and waiting in your refrigerator. It's a great way to get extra sourdough in your diet as well. So I'm just giving this a quick flute on the edges just to seal in the moisture. Gonna put some slits in the top to let out the steam just like you would for a pie. And then I'm gonna bake this at 350 degrees for 30 minutes approximately, or until it's golden brown on the top. And you can brush it with a little bit of butter if you'd like. Just depends on how much time you have and if you have some extra butter sitting around. Again, another meal completely from scratch. The only thing that we did not produce were some of the spices, which we purchase in bulk from Azure Standard, and the flour. This is one of our favorite from scratch meals that we make for our family of 7 in the winter time. It's always a hit, and you can, vary it quite easily. The next recipe I'm going to show you is our favorite beef roast. This is again one of the roasts from the beef that we just had butchered that we raised ourselves, so we were anxious to try it. We haven't had a beef roast in a while. We've been eating our venison, which is fine because it's good to learn to use what you have in your pantry, right? There will be times when you may not have as much of one thing or the other, and it's good to learn to eat seasonally, but we were anxious to try this beef roast. So this particular recipe, which is on the blog, wagonwheelhomestead.com, is our very favorite beef roast recipe. We found it several years ago, and ever since then, it's the one that my family asks for over and over and over again. So you start by just putting some tallow in the skillet and a pretty high heat, and then I'm just searing it to make sure that all the moisture stays on the inside. And I do stand it up on end and kind of sear the edges as well. Then putting it all into my slow cooker. This is a great thing to get started first thing in the morning. I've actually done it with frozen roast as well as thawed. and it works just fine. And then you have supper ready and waiting for you in the evening, which is great. So I'm using up some more of our onions from our pantry, adding in some Worcestershire sauce, some soy sauce, sage, salt and pepper, and a few other spices. And then I'm going to use the very secret ingredient for this roast is I'm going to use homemade beef broth, which we keep canned in our pantry as well, to deglaze the pan and get all the cooked bits of the roast off the pan. Then I'm going to pour that over the top of the roast and let it sit for 8 hours or so until evening, and it's just absolutely delicious. And then tonight I'm going to make it with mashed potatoes. It's one of our favorite things. And we're also going to make some brown gravy. So for mashed potatoes, again, these are potatoes from my pantry. Our favorite way to make mashed potatoes is in the Instant Pot. Now you can obviously do those on your stove as well, but I like to use the Instant Pot because I can go do chores, and when I come back, the Instant Pot is done and the potatoes are ready to mash. So we'd have mashed potatoes all the time just because I can put these in the Instant Pot, set it for 12 minutes. I know it's going to shut off when it's done. You know, if I get held up at the barn, it's just fine, right? It's going to be done when I get back and we can have amazing mashed potatoes. So I like to put garlic in with them, garlic, salt, salt and pepper, some cream, some sour cream, and mix it all up to taste, and it's absolutely delicious. The sour cream is a secret ingredient, and I also add in some onion powder, which is another secret ingredient. Super, super good. Again, to taste, so, you know, adding in a little more garlic, salt, and a little more pepper. Those are usually the things that it's missing, if anything. And I like my potatoes really well seasoned. If you like a more mild potato, obviously you wouldn't have to put in as many seasonings. And that's it. The potatoes are ready, and they are so fluffy, creamy, and delicious, and they reheat really well also. We're going to make the gravy. So I'm using, again, some beef tallow. You can also use butter, but beef tallow is what I have extra of. Adding in some gluten-free flour, actually, so that this can be gluten-free. Some salt and pepper, and then we're just going to take the broth that cooked on the meat, and we're just going to add that to the pan, about 2 cups of it or so, and stir it up really well, and then we will have the most amazing brown gravy. It's actually my favorite part of this whole meal, is the gravy. To me, it just really makes it. And we're going to have this with some corn. Now, I do not grow my own corn because I live in an area where I can easily get corn from farmers nearby. And that way I don't have to fight the raccoons and take so much space up in my garden growing corn. But we do enjoy corn, and we freeze it ourselves every winter. And like I said, we source it locally. So what you can't grow yourself, it's great if you can try to source it as locally as possible. Again, plating it up with the gravy, corn, and we're having this with raw milk. An absolutely delicious meal. Then one of the nights this week, we had our family over, some of our extended family, for a family pizza night. So it's make your own pizza. I use the sourdough pizza crust recipe that's on the blog, and we use barbecue sauce and all different kinds of toppings, homemade cheese, and we serve it brick oven style. It's absolutely so much fun. Everybody really, really enjoyed that. And the final recipe I'm going to show you today is my homemade corned beef and cabbage. This is a brand new recipe over on the blog, perfect for St. Patrick's Day. Very simple. You probably have the ingredients for it in your pantry. If not, you can get them and keep them on hand, and you can have corned beef more than just in the springtime. So I'm just making up a brine. I'm adding lots of different spices. and 2 cups of Redmond real salt. We get that from Azure Standard. And this brine is going to cover either a brisket or a roast. In this case, I'm doing a couple of roasts instead of a brisket, but you can do either one. Traditionally, you would use brisket, but roast is a cheaper cut of meat, and you can certainly do that. It works well with, the tougher cuts of roast as well. And I'm just covering the roast with the brine, and I forgot that this bowl is going to be too small. I make this every year. I've made it for several years, but I've not done 2 roasts at a time, so had to adjust as I went here. But find a large, non-reactive, so not a steel container, and put your roasts or your brisket in there. Put your cooled brine, you want to let it cool down first, over that, and then you can add a little more water or salt if needed. You want to kind of keep your ratios about 1 cup of salt to 2 quarts of water. So you just want to make sure you have enough salt in the brine. And I'm just covering that up, and I let it sit in the refrigerator for 5 to 10 days. So I did this ahead of time, and then now we are just going to cut up some onions and put them on the bottom of our slow cooker. It's very similar to making a roast. It's a very hands-off recipe, but absolutely delicious and so much healthier for you than the corned beef from the store. Adding in some garlic, which we also grew, and pulling out the roast. I use the plates just to hold the roast down under the brine. And just pulling them out. They look really good. Brining meat is always so much fun. Then I'm just going to lay them right on top of the slow cooker. Now, I probably should have done this in 2 different slow cookers, but I just made it work, and you'll see that as I go along. So we're just adding a few more spices again. You can find all that information out in the recipe, and I'll be sure to link that in the description box below for you as well. And then adding water until it's just below the roast and turning it on for 5 hours. Then after 5 hours, because this is already full, I'm actually taking out 1 of the roasts because they are basically cooked through just fine. Taking out 1 of the roasts, I'm going to leave that, and we'll use that for like Reuben pizza, or we'll make Reuben sandwiches, might even make some sourdough stromboli. If you're going to go to the trouble to brine something, brine extra. You can also freeze these roasts or brisket either before you cook them or after you cook them, either one. So that's another option. And I'm adding a bunch of potatoes and carrots. Now, this looks like a lot, but my family loves this recipe. And I also like to fry up some of the meat and the veggies for a breakfast. You can add in some beets and make red flannel hash, serve it with some eggs. So there's lots of meals that we can make out of just this corned beef and cabbage. The cabbage and the veggies, I think, are my favorite part, although the meat's always really good as well. So I let those veggies cook for a couple of hours, and then right before I went to the barn to do chores, I'm adding in the cabbage, because you don't want to cook the cabbage until it's absolute mush. So I'm going to rough cut the cabbage and put it into a slow cooker. And I did purchase this cabbage, by the way, because I needed to get this recipe put onto the blog, just this 1 head of cabbage. But that is the only thing I had to purchase. Now, if I had a root cellar, I would have saved cabbage from last year from my garden. I have sauerkraut that I've canned, but I don't have any fresh cabbage just because it is March and we don't have any right now. But typically we do have fresh cabbage. So I'm just going to add this to the top of the slow cooker. I did pull out that second roast just to make room. I'm going to cook this in the juice for about an hour while we do the chores, and then supper will be ready. It's time to plate this up. Cabbage is cooked just perfectly. The house smells amazing. Such a nutritious comfort food that the whole family loves. The kids actually were fighting over the carrots and cabbage. It was so good. So these are some of the recipes that we enjoy in a typical week. I hope this was inspiring to you. If you like to learn more about how to cook for a large family using just the food that you can grow and produce on a homestead, And definitely hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, because that's a lot of what we are talking about here, showing you all the different things that we do here on our Nebraska homestead. And that's a lot of things. And so we're glad that you're here, and we're happy to share a little bit of our life with you. Plating this up, and I'm also going to serve the potatoes with a little bit of salt and pepper and some homemade sour cream. A very healthy and nutritious meal. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.